What it says is, I worship a God who wouldn't know that this was your motive for believing in him. My deity would rather take someone who says, hey, sounds like a no-lose wager to me.
Blaise Pascal was a very distinguished Catholic theologian of the 17th century, and also a very, very, very distinguished mathematician, and still is considered to be one because he's one of the founders of probability theory. And he's the author of a famous book called, in French, Les Pensées, Thoughts, which is addressed, interestingly, it's one of the reasons I'm so fond of it, in a way, it's addressed to the man who is so made that he cannot believe. Pascal knew that there were always people, there would always be people, always had been people, who are constitutionally incapable of believing this stuff, can't be brought to believe it. And one of his cruder attempts to break down resistance of people like myself was this. He said, look, what have you got to lose? Say you believe in God, and if he does exist, you have a chance of his favor. If you go ahead like this and say he doesn't, what if he does exist? You lose everything. That's it. I don't think I've condensed it in any unfair way. That's it. That's why it's called Pascal's wager. Sometimes called Pascal's gambit, in fact, by mathematicians, but it has the correct echo to me precisely of the huckster on the racetrack saying, how can you lose? Have I got a bet for you? Can you imagine anything cheaper, really, or more sordid? The two things that it assumes, needs to assume, are these. One, a fantastically cynical God who's also a bloody fool. I mean, a nasty and cynical person who's also so thick that he would be fooled by me saying, tell you what, on the flip coin that you exist and I need a break, I'll say I believe in you. He says, oh, I'm really impressed now.
Who will, if I say to him, tell you what, I'll give up the convictions of a lifetime, fling myself at your feet, pretend I believe, hope you're impressed, would say, yeah, that's good, that's progress.
Come into my used car lot. You've just undergone a moral transformation.
And I also, because I'm God, I know why you did, because it was in the hope of winning favor with me. Well, that's fine. You'll therefore get it. That seems to me a rather contemptible thing, and necessarily, therefore, to entail a rather contemptible human being who says, I don't really believe this, I have no faith, but what can I lose by pretending to God that I do? I might get a break. I mean, this is pretty low, isn't it?
This Blaise Pascal is considered in the first rank of Christian thinkers, I might add. Come on, baby, just lie a little, and you never know. No, don't talk to me like that, and don't call it piety when you do, or be prepared to have piety despised.
In other words, you get no reward for intellectual consistency, courage, honesty, anything of that sort. And of course, as with all these human-made ideas of divine tribunals, no lawyers will represent you, no appeal, and no opportunity to produce any evidence. I pass over that lightly and say, what does it ask also of the wager? It asks for someone to be a credulous, cringing, unprincipled serf who says, sure, what are principles for if not to be sold in the hope of a future boon?
The second thing it assumes, of course, is the most corrupt and vulgar kind of consumer, the sort of person who would fall for a deal like that and would think, that would be nice. I'll bet correctly.
Have you got any mortgages I should be taking out? Any underground swamp stock? He won't know that I only believe in him on a bet because it will benefit me. And that my honest doubts, my absolute, actually my sincere conviction that there is no such person would be rewarded by him for their honesty with eternal punishment. He'd say, well, so now you're here, you offered a perfectly good inducement to believe in me, and you said no, and now I'm going to hurt you. What's moral about Pascal? Hands up. Anyone? Huh? What's moral about that? I say nothing about its truth. So here's my answer.
If I'm surprised to find, when I pass on from this vale of tears, that I'm facing a tribunal, which you notice, by the way, you're not allowed to bring a lawyer. There's no jury. There's no appeal. I mean, this is altogether unattractive. Why people want it to be believed their God is this way, I don't know. But suppose that I'm there. It may be a one-person tribunal, depending on your view of the Trinity. Well, you talk about the way that religion degrades argument and degrades dignity and self-respect. There you have it in one syllogism. But I have my answer, the following. On the assumption that the God they're talking about is anything like the one they ought to be believing in, this is what I say in my book I'm going to say. By the way, but just before I tell you, you know what Bertrand Russell said in reply to the same question? He said, I should reply, oh Lord, you did not give us enough evidence. I would say, I hope you noticed that I didn't try and curry favor, that I was honestly unable to believe in the claims made by your human spokespersons. Now do I get any understanding? And if that doesn't work, well, then I don't know what would. But I'm not going to try anything servile. I'm resolved on that point.
It would be more comforting, wouldn't it? And more comfortable.
Which the servile? No.
To make an accommodation, to have some belief in a possibility of this not being the end.
Well, as long as I don't have to take the word of other humans on what are the necessary propitiations and gestures and subjections I have to submit myself to in order to qualify. In other words, there are many, many discrepant religions, all of whom say only if I support them or endorse them will I qualify. Well, now, I don't know that there is no such thing as consciousness without the brain, for example, that there's no such survival. I'd very much doubt it. But let's say we don't know enough to say it's impossible. I would say what is impossible is that other humans can know what the conditions are whereby you qualify for survival. That I do know is false. I hope you'll forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, for mentioning this, because I don't at all want to invoke my own particular case in an attempt to gain your sympathy. I'll say it as objectively as I can. Some of you may have read that I'm not very well and may not have very long to live. I find it particularly objectionable that this wager, which Pascal offers to anyone at any time in their life, to be fair to him, tends to be pressed on you all the time, if you don't look as if you're going to last very long, by people who say, surely that now you might be frightened and not feeling at your best and afraid of a smelly and disgusting end. Surely this would be the perfect moment to repudiate all the convictions of a lifetime. For some reason, that comes naturally to a lot of people of faith. I don't mind for myself, but I think it's the vilest kind of bullying to inflict on people in hospital and people who are in extremis. Anyway, thus my curtain raiser to the great Pascal. Thank you. In my book, I say that there's no reason at all to believe that the so-called Jesus of Nazareth ever existed, but here's what I say about Socrates. The original collision between our reasoning faculties and any form of organized faith, this is my book, though it must have occurred before in the minds of many, is probably exemplified in the trial of Socrates in 399 BC. It does not matter at all to me that we have no absolute certainty that Socrates even existed. The records of his life and his words are second-hand, almost but not quite as much as are the books of the Jewish and Christian Bible and the hadiths of Islam. Philosophy, however, has no need of such demonstrations because it does not deal in revealed wisdom. Now, as it happens, we do have some very good descriptions of the life of Socrates that make his existence to me plausible, but it doesn't matter to me at all whether he was real or not. What matters is that someone advanced his method of reasoning, his testing of evidence against experience, his commitment to a certain kind of dialectical honesty, and that if it hadn't been him, it would have been someone else. So that's what's precious to me. And that he never said, you've got to believe in everything I say, or go to hell or heaven. Because, and here's why you've got to agree with me, because my mother never went to bed with anybody. And that proves the truth of what I say. Or by the way, I must have looked very dead when they took me down from the cross, but I didn't die. And that proves my point.
Some things you have as the deepest conviction of your soul, and they're things that make sense of the world in ways that nothing else makes sense of the world. But if you ask me, do I know that God exists the way I know that that glass is on the table, then I say you're putting it in an empirical, scientific framework, which is exactly the framework that religious people want to keep religion out of.
No, but I want to put it the other way around. How do you know the mystery won't be solved one day?
Because it's not a mystery of a question that's solvable. It's like saying, how do you know that the mystery won't be solved? That you have an ineradicable sense that the world is wondrous. I don't know how you would even think about solving such a mystery.
I could understand it and still find it wondrous. Christopher, what about you? If it's not God, is it all soluble?
Well, first,
one day?
You're right that science has made many things more comprehensible to us, and it's explained things that religion used to take credit for. In other words, now we know there's a germ theory of disease. Diseases are not curses or revenges from heaven. Same with earthquakes and so on. The stuff they used to teach us, and many of them still do, is nonsense. Evil nonsense as well as ignorant nonsense. But it's also taught us, just in my lifetime, an enormous amount more about how little we know. We're much, much more ignorant than people who lived before Galileo. Because we have now an increasingly large idea of the fantastic expanse of the unknown. That's precisely the moment at which to say that skepticism is what's necessary, inquiry, debate, doubt. Where's faith in this? Where's the usefulness of faith there? There's no use to it at all. Socrates, who, as far as I know, existed but may well not have done, it doesn't matter to me. No one will insult me if they say, Socrates, your great hero, didn't exist. Try it on a Muslim, try it on a Christian, that their prophets didn't exist. Or tell people that Moses is a myth. They start hurling themselves about, making menacing noises very often. Socrates said, you're only educated when you've understood how ignorant you are. And you're only going to even find that out by doubting everything all the time. There's all the difference in the world between that outlook and that mentality, and the mentality of faith. And second, on metaphysics, which I noticed take refuge in several times already this evening, like what is love? Is something poetic or is it prosaic? Very good questions, but metaphysical ones. Those who say God exists and intervenes in the world, in other words, those who say there is a religious God, a God of religion, are saying that redemption is on offer to human beings, that salvation is on offer to them, and that if they reject the offer, they can be in really big trouble. Now, don't start talking to an audience like this, or, if you don't mind, to a debate partner like me, as if religion was a private matter, because everybody knows that if it was, there wouldn't be anything to argue about. It's precisely because it claims to be a total solution, a complete solution to all problems, available on pain of death, sometimes, in some forms, but available to you if you'll only have enough faith. Well, we've just found out that faith is probably the most overrated of the virtues and the one least useful to us in the real dilemmas that we actually have to face.
There are so many things to unpack in that statement that I'll just pick on two or three. The first being, interestingly, that Socrates, whether he existed or not, according to Plato at least, believed in the gods and even in an afterlife. So he didn't doubt everything.
The gods may be.
But, wait, didn't interrupt you. But I want you to know, and you should know this in particular, I didn't interrupt you twice. But I want you to know.
You weren't quick enough.
It may be true that part of it was speed, but I also think it's because civility is very religious virtue. So
I could have said that.
Take the two figures of Jesus of Nazareth and Socrates. I believe Jesus of Nazareth operates on the fringe of mythology and prehistory. I don't think it's absolutely certainly established there was such a person, or that he made those pronouncements, or that he was the Son of God, or the Son of a Virgin, or any of these things. And I would likewise have to concede that we only know of the work of Socrates through second-hand sources, in the same way, second or third-hand. Quite impressive ones in some cases, from Plato's Apology, but it can't be demonstrated to me that Socrates ever walked the streets of Athens.
That's 5 minutes.
How many?
That's 5 minutes.
That's 5. Just quickly, then. If it could be shown to a believing Christian, the grave of Jesus opened and the body of him found and the resurrection disproved,
if that could be archaeologically done for the sake of argument, it would presumably be a disaster for you. You'd have to think, then we're alone. Then how are we going to know right from wrong? What can we do? I maintain with Socrates that, on the contrary, the moral problems and ethical problems and other dilemmas that we have would be exactly the same as they are. What are our duties to each other? How could we build the just city? How should we think? How can we face the possibility of our loneliness? How can we do right and do wrong? These questions would remain exactly as they are, and as they do. And so all that is necessary is to transcend the superstitious, transcend the mythical, and accept the responsibility, take it on ourselves, that no one can do this for us. And I would hope that in a great university, that thought might carry the day. Thank you.
Gentlemen.
That's for debate too.
No. I mean, don't say, look, do yourself and your faith the honor of saying it's faith. Don't say it's science-based.
The argument would be...
You won't get away with it.
Look, the argument would be, Christopher, is that if the universe exploded into being out of nothing, then miracles are possible because the greatest miracle of all has already occurred. The question is, have miracles occurred in the first century? That requires another debate whereby we have to look at the historical evidence and see. And if it is true that that Jesus really did come and say and do the things that the New Testament writer said he did, then whatever he teaches is true, because if he rose from the dead, he was God. If he taught that there will be an intervention, then there will be. That's the argument. I don't have time to support it.
Very good. Now, a sentence or two from David Hume on miracles would clear all this up.
You'll need to.
Oh dear.
It's fallen off. Sorry.
That's one up. A sentence or two from David Hume would correct what you said. A miracle is defined not as a part of the natural order, but as a suspension of the natural order.
No, an intervention.
You can't say of the Big Bang, which is the foundation of the natural order, that it's a suspension of what it starts. You may not do that. However, if you meet someone in the street who you yesterday saw executed, you can say either that an extraordinary miracle has occurred or that you are under a very grave misapprehension. And David Hume's logic on this, I think, is quite irrefutable. He says, what is more likely, that the laws of nature have been suspended in your favor and in a way that you approve, or that you've made a mistake? And in each case you must, and especially if you didn't see it yourself and you're hearing it from someone who says that they did. I would go further and say the following. I'll grant you that it would be possible to track the pregnancy of the woman Mary, who's mentioned about 3 times in the Bible, and to show that there was no male intervention in her life at all, but yet she delivered herself of a healthy baby boy. I can say, I don't say that's impossible. Parthenogenesis is not completely unthinkable, but it does not prove that his paternity is divine. And it wouldn't prove that any of his moral teachings were thereby correct. Nor, if I was to see him executed one day and see him walking the streets the next, would that show that his father was God, or his mother was a virgin, or that his teachings were true, especially given the commonplace nature of resurrection at that time and place. After all, Lazarus was raised, never said a word about it. The daughter of Jairus was raised, didn't say a thing about what she'd been through. And the Gospels tell us that at the time of the crucifixion, all the graves in Jerusalem opened, and their occupants wandered around the streets to greet. So that it seems the resurrection was something of a banality at the time. Not all of those people clearly were divinely conceived. So I'll give you all the miracles, and you'll still be left exactly where you are now, holding an empty sack.
No, Christopher, you have to look at each miracle in light of the evidence and the context. Hume was wrong because his premise that was wrong was the one that said the evidence for the regular is always greater than that for the rare.
I'm willing to grant it all. I'm willing to grant the Immaculate Conception first, then the virgin birth, then the resurrection, and the Annunciation and the Assumption. I'm willing to grant all of it. It doesn't prove the truth of the proposition that you should take no thought for the morrow. The central doctrine of Jesus of Nazareth, take no thought for the morrow. No investment, no thrift, no care for your children, that you should abandon your family, not worry about construction, about investment, about anything. Just follow me. A ridiculous and immoral proposition that, as C.S. Lewis so cleverly, and I must say for him, very honestly puts it, means that the man must either have been a maniac, a sick man, an evil man, or he must have believed that the world was coming immediately to an end, and that he was commanded to announce this fact to the deluded Bronze Age inhabitants of Palestine. Because if he didn't believe that, and if he didn't believe he was divinely mandated, then his words would not have been inaccurate or false, they would have been wicked. That's what you have to be talking about. It's actually rather wonderful, isn't it? The religious authorities who used to say they were infallible say, just take the last pope, just the last. I know I'm not talking with the Catholic apologists this evening, but nonetheless, the church, when people say the church, they know which one they mean. They mean the one in Rome. The one where when Stephen Hawking was invited and was asked at the conference on the church and science, is there anything he'd like to see in Rome while he was there, he said he'd like to see the records of the trial of Galileo. Don't please be invoking Mr. Hawking, by the way, as if he was a deist. The last pope, just in the last decade of his tenure, apologized. He said, we were wrong about the Jewish question. We probably shouldn't have said for so long the Jews were responsible for the murder of Christ. We were probably wrong in forced conversion of the peoples of the Indies, as they were thought of, the isthmus and the southern cone of our hemisphere. We were certainly wrong. We owe an apology to the Muslims for the atrocities of the Crusades. We owe an apology to the Eastern Orthodox churches for the incredible butchery to which they, our fellow Christians, were subjected by us, the Roman Catholic Church. And we probably owe an apology to the Protestants for saying and so many awful things about them and torturing and burning and killing them too. So having now said we were completely wrong and completely cruel and completely sadistic and completely violent and retarded human civilization for that many centuries in that many countries and continents, we're quit. And now we can go back to being infallible all over again. There are people who on faith will accept being spoken to in that tone of voice and in that way. But I, ladies and gentlemen, am not one of them. And I don't think there's any form of persuasion that should allow you to be spoken to as if you were serfs or slaves either. Here's what Lewis actually does say, and why because I'm not going to, I take so few occasions to praise C.S. Lewis, and let alone to defend him against Dinesh, that I'm going to insist on doing it properly. Here is what Lewis says. The alternative he gives you is not that of authenticity or otherwise, a Johnsonian, a Boswellian test at all. He says, if Jesus claims to be able to take your sins on himself, remember what we're talking about here, the to me revolting idea of human sacrifice, of vicarious redemption, of scapegoating, the idea that you can throw your sin on someone else and make him die and take your sin with him. The repulsive, immoral idea of vicarious redemption. I can pay your debt, brother, sister. I can. I will if I can. I could serve your sentence in prison if I was brave enough, or if it was allowed to me. Maybe. But I cannot take your responsibility from you, because it would be immoral to do so. You have no right to ask it of me. You can't shed that responsibility. The whole basis of morality requires that you face it and take it upon yourself. Nonetheless, Christianity offers the repulsive idea of vicarious redemption, and Lewis faces it, and this is what he says. He says, now unless the speaker who offers that is God, this is really so preposterous as to be comic. We can all understand how a man forgives offenses against himself. You tread on my toes, I forgive you. You steal my money, I forgive you. But what should we make of a man, himself unrobbed and untrodden upon, who announced that he forgave you for treading on other men's toes and stealing other men's money? Asinine fatuity, is the kindest description we should give of his conduct. This is Lewis. Yet this is what Jesus did. He told people their sins were forgiven, and never waited to consult the other people whom their sins had injured. He unhesitatingly behaved as if he was the party chiefly concerned, the person chiefly offended in all offenses. This makes sense only if he really was the God whose laws are broken and whose love is wounded in every sin. In the mouth of any speaker who is not God, these words would imply what I can only regard as a silliness and conceit, unrivaled by any other character in history. To people like Thomas Jefferson, a hero of mine, who said that Jesus wasn't divine but he was a great moral teacher, Lewis quite properly spoke with scorn and said, "That's the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sorts of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman and something worse." And Lewis, who's argued so well up till then, can't complete a syllogism. Poor guy, he never quite could do that. He said, since I don't think he was the devil of hell, I have to conclude he was the Son of God. Well, you don't have to follow the paltry logic of that to see that at least Lewis is not making it easy on himself. And that to prove that this deluded individual did actually exist, if it could be proven, which it cannot, would leave you as a Christian with all your work still ahead of you. And you still have to face my objection, brilliantly phrased by Lewis, that the teachings of Christianity, from vicarious redemption to the love of enemies, no thought for the morrow need be taken, that no thrift or care or family or society or solidarity is necessary, that these are immoral teachings that have done and continue to inflict untold moral and physical harm on our species. And until we outgrow this nonsense, we have no chance of emancipating ourselves. Recently, very recently, in fact, as little ago in time as last year, the Vatican announced that limbo, the destination of the unbaptized child soul, no longer exists. There is no such place. St. Augustine was in error, it appears, in sending so many children, at least the souls of so many unbaptized children, to this destination for so long. Among the comments that I heard about this, among the mildest, actually, was that of a woman raised in the Catholic faith, whose child had died before baptism could take place, who had for many years believed that that's where her unbaptized child had gone. And she said, they can't tell me that place doesn't exist. It's been as real to me as anything possibly could be for so long. They've no right to tell me now that this no longer exists. Ontologically, limbo exists for those who believe in it, just as God does. I'm not here to deny that. It's only a few decades now since the rival church, Church of Rome, the Church of England, announced that really no one actually goes to hell. It could be that after you die you're forbidden God's grace, but there's no real place of eternal, unending, infinite torture and torment with which those who claimed the grace of God and the redemption of Jesus made a living for so many years. And how do they make their living? By lying to children. Think of it. Hundreds and hundreds of years of people proudly earning their keep by lying to children and terrifying them, and saying that because they could do that, they were morally superior to us. Reason, common sense, decency, ordinary decency rebels against this kind of mind-forged manacle, however charmingly or humorously it's expressed. But hell exists in the minds of several people I've spoken to just today on this campus in the intervals of other conversations. For them it's real, and I don't say that it's not. But what I want to show is that it can, if it does exist, nonetheless be abolished, like many other mind-forged manacles and man-made tyrannies that confront us. And in fact, that this belief in a supreme and unalterable tyranny is the oldest enemy of our species, the oldest enemy of our intellectual freedom and our moral autonomy, and must be met, and must be challenged, and must be overthrown. I want to argue for nothing less than that. Dinesh points it out rather intelligently to you. What does Christianity say? Those laws can be suspended, and in your favor too, if you make the right prayers, and propitiations and sacrifices. There can be, a virgin can conceive, a dead body can walk again, your leprosy can be cured, the blind can see. Nonsense. It's not moral to lie to children. It's not moral to lie to ignorant, uneducated people and to tell them that if they will only believe nonsense, they can be saved. It's immoral. The totalitarian concept of the afterlife, the idea, the hideous idea, doesn't even occur in the New Testament. Doesn't occur even in the violent rape and genocide-filled books of the Jewish Bible. There is no punishment of the dead. When God has destroyed your tribe and had your virgins and your children murdered in front of you and your flocks and herds scattered and so on, and you also fall down to a bronze sword, he's done with you. The earth can close over you. That's it. You've tangled with the wrong tribe, the one he favored. Not until gentle Jesus, meek and mild, are you told, if you don't make the right propitiations, you can depart into everlasting fire. One of the most wicked ideas ever preached, and one that's ruined the lives and the peace of mind of many, many children, preached to them by vicious, child-hating old men and women in the name of this ghastly cult, which we're met here to discuss tonight. I don't need 2 minutes to finish with this religion, but thanks. Quite like other girls. It's his nature. Actually, he is like other girls in that he's, when I last checked, absolutely boy mad. He's not being condemned for what he does, he's being condemned for what he is. You're a child made in the image of God. Oh no, you're not. You're a faggot. And you can't join your church and you can't go to heaven. This is disgraceful. It's inhuman. It's obscene. And it comes from a clutch of hysterical, sinister virgins who've already betrayed their charge in the children of their own church. For shame, for shame. And finally, under this Pope, as if it wasn't bad enough to try and restore the Latin Mass to gratify the mad fascistic followers of Archbishop Lefebvre, but to begin again to offer remission of sin, as Bishop Ratzinger, the Pope, I'll call him the Pope for heaven's sake, wants to do. If you come to a Catholic youth festival in Sydney, Australia, where I just was, you'll get a certain remission from purgatory or hell. It may be temporary. If you come a lot and you give a lot, you'll get possibly permanent remission from the eternal punishment that they don't know any more about than you and I do. This is the sale of indulgences blatantly, openly. It's the same temptation that was offered to those who set off on that Fourth Crusade that's just been apologized for, and killed all the Jews of Europe on their way, sacked Byzantine Christianity when they got to Constantinople, and then went on to massacre the Arabs and Muslims. They were offered paradise if they died committing these terrible crimes against humanity. But if you see what I mean, therefore, the stimulus to crime, the impetus to crime, the belief in certainty, the belief that a divine warrant entitles you to do whatever you like, is the sin that must be cancelled, that must be annealed, that must somehow be apologized for. Now, I don't wish any. That's perfect timing. I don't wish any ill on any fellow primate or mammal of mine, even if this primate or mammal claims to be a primate in possession of a secret that's denied to me. I can forgive even that because I live in a country where their reign doesn't run, their writ doesn't apply, and they can't burn me and silence me and censor me any more than they can tell my wife that she can't use contraception, or any more than they can really tell Stephen that he's a beast. So I don't at all look forward to the death of Joseph Ratzinger. I don't. Or any other pope, not really. Except for one tiny reason which I ought to confess and share with you. When he dies, there's quite a long interval till the conclave can meet. Maybe Cardinal Law will still be on it to pick another pope. Sometimes it goes on for months till they get the white smoke. And for that whole time, that whole interval, it's a delicious, lucid interlude, there isn't anyone on earth who claims to be infallible. Isn't that nice? All I want to propose in closing is this, that if the human species is to rise to the full height that's demanded by its dignity and by its intelligence, we must all of us move to a state of affairs where that condition is permanent. and I think we should get on with it. Okay, thank you for having me.
Well, Christopher, thank you very much for all that.
It's considered perfectly normal in this society to approach dying people who you don't know, but who are unbelievers, and say, now are you going to change your mind? It's, what, in fact, it's considered almost a polite question. And as you know, there's a long history of fraud about this. People claim that Darwin had a deathbed recantation. They'd made up lies about Thomas Paine. It goes on all the time. It's a very nasty little history, but there's also a horrible undertone of blackmail to it. People write and say, look, you've got about one chance left now. Aren't you going to take it? I'm writing to you as a friend. They've even tried it on me when I've been very ill and I haven't had quite the vinegar I'd like to have had in a hospital bed. I don't mind, I can take it. But I think there are a lot of people older than myself, iller than myself, perhaps at the risk of seeming conceited, less educated than myself, to whom that's a horrible experience. It's very depressing and alarming to be spoken to in that way. I mean, if Sam and I were to form a core of people to go around religious hospitals, which is what happens in reverse, and say to people who are lying in pain, say, did you say you were Catholic? Yes. Well, look, you may only have a few days left, but you don't have to live them as a serf, you know. Just recognize that was all bullshit, that the priests have been cheating you. And I guarantee you'll feel better. I don't think that would be very ethical.
Okay, but
I think it would be something of a breach of taste. But if it's in the name of if it's in the name of God, it has a social license. Well, fuck that, is what I say. And will say, if it's my last breath. Thank you.
Fred.
Christopher Hitchens.
Thank you, John. You'll give me a minute, won't you? Thank you very much, Joan, for that slightly misleading introduction to someone who may no longer be a socialist, but still vibrates to Marxism. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. I think I'll be able to be reasonably terse, given the very heavy artillery that follows me on our side. I think it might perhaps have been felt when I was chosen that the case for atheism should not be made by the spokesman for its moderate wing, Richard Dawkins. It might be okay to have at least one extremist on the panel. And I'll begin at once by recalling an exchange I had recently in Colorado Springs with a spokesman of America's evangelical broadcasting wing, a much overrated but nonetheless significant force in American politics. This broadcaster asked me, in response to my own statement of unbelief, he said, I insist that you answer the following question, and that you answer it with a yes or a no. I braced myself. I accepted the challenge unseen. He said, you are to imagine yourself in a strange city where you've never been before. You are to imagine nightfall coming on, and you to be without friends or succor in this town. And you are to ask yourself whether you would feel safer or less safe when you saw a dozen men coming towards you in the dusk, if you were to know that they had recently come from a prayer meeting. This is I think I can justifiably say I'm relaying to you, comrades, friends, brothers, sisters, the challenge that was put by the religious to me. you'll see at once it's not a yes-no answer. You can't give a yes-no answer to that, but I accept it anyway. I said, very well, I won't give a Sesame Street reply, but just without leaving the letter B, I have been in that situation. In Bombay, in Belfast, in Beirut, in Belgrade, in Baghdad, and many other places too. And I won't tell you about all of them, but let me just, as it were, fill in some of those latent blanks. In Belfast, the capital city of one of the provinces of this, our United Kingdom, as everybody here knows, everything, culturally, educationally, economically, politically, socially, has been very gravely retarded for at least a quarter of a century. At least half a century and maybe more since partition, and before that, because partition is both the outcome and the cause of sectarian warfare in this town, by the simple fact that there are people there who are willing to kill not just one another, but one another's children on the basis of what kind of Christian they are. Horrible things are done, not just in pubs and clubs, but on the streets, on housing estates, on university campuses in that city still, despite the relatively good news we've had today, where the situation remains dominated by barbaric sectarian party leaders, on this and no other basis. Both churches demand that their children are sent to separate schools. They each agree with the other that above all things, their own children must be protected from the faith of another faith. I don't think I need to elaborate very much more on how horrendous the consequences of that have been and how they are enshrined, by the way, in our own constitution, which mandates that our own head of the church is also the head of the state and of the armed forces, with all the ludicrous Windsor consequences that you get if you found a national church on the family values of Henry VIII. These conditions, which are farcical in England, Wales, and Scotland, are tragic and ugly, only a few minutes flying time from where we sit. If I pass on from Belfast to, say, Baghdad, where I've recently been, and without reopening any of the arguments about the rightness or otherwise of the coalition intervention in Mesopotamia, I think it can be granted by any fair-minded person that what was most needed in Iraq after 30 years of fascism and war was a period of reflection, a short interlude of calm during which Iraqis could look about themselves and decide perhaps whom they'd like to vote, perhaps what kind of country they'd like to live in, what kind of federal system they might wish to evolve, and to do so unmolested by violence or terror. The parties of God have vetoed every hope of that process. The parties of God now have the Iraqi people in their jaws, and they're saying to them, it's not enough just to kill foreigners or to rail against Jews or Christians or secularists. That's nothing like enough. It's only in Iraq, not only, mainly, chiefly in Iraq, that it's considered perfectly all right, in fact, a religious duty to blow up the mosques, to destroy the religious schools of other Muslims, of the Muslims of another school, not unlike the pattern of Belfast. It's not enough to have faith, you must have the right version of your own faith, or risk death, mutilation, and humiliation, and the destruction, the immiseration, the torture of Iraqi society is something that all of us can read about every day. Suppose we're to go to Beirut, the pearl of the Levant, the most civilized and beautiful and cultured city of the Middle East, and to see what happens when, for politicized reasons, a sectarian constitution is in place which says that the president of Lebanon must always be a Maronite Christian, that the speaker of its parliament must always be a Shia, that its vice president must always be a Sunni, that the Druze must have their share, and so on, leaving out at the very bottom, I'm afraid, such forces as Kurds and Armenians, but making everyone defined in their citizenship by their faith. Do I need to elaborate what that's done to retard, to bankrupt, to beggar, to disfigure, and to degrade what could have been an ideally plural and diverse and happy society? Remaining with letter B, shall I say Banja Luka? Shall I say Belgrade? Or just say Bosnia? again, one of the most civilized enclaves of the Balkans for many years, protected by a secular constitution and the remains of what had been a secular and democratic republic. And just look what happens when it is decided that it is a matter of faith that determines your citizenship, your allegiance, your identity, your nature, your rights. See the recrudescence in the Europe of the late 20th and early 21st century of Catholic fascist parties we thought we'd left behind at Nuremberg, the Ustasha. The recrudescence of forces like the Chetniks, the Serbian Orthodox fascists who took exactly the same view except the other way around. See the craven way in which our spineless media, which always defers to people of faith, say that it was Serbs who shelled Sarajevo or Croats who shelled Mostar, when what they should have been saying was, today the Christian Orthodox militia bombarded an open city around the clock, or yesterday the Catholic forces shelled Mostar from dawn till dusk. They didn't do it because it's a matter of taste. We're supposed to respect people of faith, and we're supposed to respect them while they do that and do that and make this sort of excuse. There aren't enough words, in my lexicon at any rate, to express the contempt that I think any right-thinking person must feel for this conscription of this kind of medieval barbarism. Joan will tell me when I've got a minute. I don't know whether I'm yet trespassing on my rivals and my allies' time, but if I was to add Bombay to this list, the city that was very nearly ruined by the sectarian partition of India in 1947, 1948, where once again people were told it's a matter of faith what kind of Indian you are. You may have to become a Pakistani if you're Muslim. You may have to lose your life on the proposition. You may not just be a Hindu. Bombay more or less survived this, the terrifying ethnic cleansing and the pogrom that ensued when the subcontinent was mutilated and maimed and partitioned on this basis in the hopes of a genuine Indian unity and independence, ruined by way of appeasement of people of faith. But Bombay sort of recovered until recently, when now its name has been changed, its minority citizens persecuted, intimidated, driven out by a new Hindu nationalist party, the Shiv Sena, that says that, again, if you do not follow the right God, if you don't accept the supernatural as a real force in everyday life, you are not worth whatever it takes to become or to remain or be treated as an ordinary, democratic, civilized human being in, again, one of the great cities of Asia. Now, it's not part of my case, and I'm sure it's not part of Professor Grayling's or Professor Dawkins's either, to say that religion is the reason for all of this, or the exclusive or sole reason for all of it. I think it would be crude and reductionist to say that. But who is going to argue, I'll be fascinated to see, who is going to argue that the matter of faith, that the religious allegiance, that the preachings of religion have not in all these cases gravely exacerbated, gravely deepened, gravely poisoned and prolonged all of these things that have made our tenuous civilization extremely difficult to defend, uphold, maintain, let alone to advance. I don't believe this case could be made. That's for a simple reason, because religion is not provided to us by revelation. It doesn't come from the heavens. It doesn't come from the beyond. It doesn't come from the divine. It's man-made. And it shows. It shows very well that religion is created, invented, imposed by a species half a chromosome away from the chimpanzee. It shows, doesn't it? Well, why do we deceive ourselves on this point? And is there anywhere, I'm now going to wind up, is there anywhere of the places I've mentioned, and I exempt Basra and all the other B's I could take you around, where it wouldn't be enormously welcome if there was a mass conversion to secularism, or a mass adoption of the secular idea and principle, of the principles of Bertrand Russell, who once spoke famously from this platform, of Thomas Paine, of Thomas Jefferson, of Voltaire, and others. And I'll close by saying that I want you to be on your guard against two false issues in this respect, and I'll be very brief. When I mentioned those gentlemen, and I could mention some ladies too in this connection, like Mary Wollstonecraft, don't let anyone tell you that, oh, well, secular tyranny is just as bad. After all, there have been fascist and communist dictatorships which have been just as revolting. Fascism, as you know, was supported by the Catholic Church all through its life, and in fact till after it had died, and still is defended by it. One of the leaders of the Axis was actually the Japanese leader, was actually a god. There's no way of saying fascism and National Socialism in the Axis was secular. And in the case of Stalinism and Maoism and the Khmer Rouge, the same mistake is made, and a religion is made out of man. It's the religious impulse itself that I think we need to oppose, to criticize in ourselves as well as in others. The argument from faith, in other words, the argument from certainty. So those of us who maintain this may not be described, my closing point, as fundamentalists or secularists, as certain cheap and demagogic and opportunist forces have recently been suggesting. We do believe in evidence, we do believe in skepticism, we do believe in reason. We hold our views with as much conviction and principle as any God-botherer does. But we are open to the argument, and we're going to prove it tonight to you. And don't let anyone dare to imply there's a moral equivalence between us and the fanatics and the fools and those who think they know God's will and can tell you what it is, who are our enemies, and your enemies too. So, I beg to propose the motion that stands in our name. Thank you. It's impressive to me that the evidence is so thin, and is so hysterical, and is so feeble, and is so obviously, strenuously cobbled together, because it suggests that something was going on, there was some character. And I don't want to, therefore, to profane those who think that no, that there must have been something, and say, no, there was nothing. This is not a whole cloth fabrication, but it is a very human and very intelligible and very pitiable, I think, practice of fraud that may have worked on stupefied peasants in the Greater Jerusalem area, but should really have no power to influence anyone in this room, whereas the noble methods and words and systems by which Socrates reasoned will continue to illuminate our path for as long as we care about the only real gift we have, which is our independent intelligence.
There's also, I think, a real problem about anything that's eternal. I should probably close with this. It will happen to all of us that at some point you get tapped on the shoulder and told, not just that the party's over, but slightly worse, the party's going on, but you have to leave. and it's going on without you. That's the reflection, I think, that most upsets people about their demise. All right then, because it might make us feel better, let's pretend the opposite. Instead, you'll get tapped on the shoulder and told, great news, this party's going on forever, and you can't leave. You've got to stay. The boss says so, and he also insists that you have a good time. I've read about David's father, and I had a bad time when my own father passed on, but the father proposed by monotheism is the father who doesn't die, who reassures his children, don't worry, I'll never leave you. You'll never see the end of me. You'll never get the chance to feel sorry. I'm always there. I'm the absolute ultimate in dictatorship, and in my courts there's no appeal. Do you really think that this would cheer up anyone of sentience or humanity or capable of feeling of irony? I submit it's out of the question.
I know devout Christians who keep a Jewish Sabbath as a day of disengagement from the world, as well as Sunday as the Lord's Day for church. I know Jews who have incorporated Buddhist meditation into their daily worship. I know Buddhists who are enchanted by the Christian notion of a God who enters into our suffering to make it less painful. This reciprocal contribution, I think, is a tremendous step forward. And I would like to think that between theists and non-theists, there is some kind of possibility for a similar fruitful exchange.
It's a bit mushy, isn't it, this I'm okay, you're okay, ecumenicism, as well as, if I may say so, a bit ahistorical. Hundreds and thousands and millions of people died on these points of distinction and thought that their lives were well thrown away for it. And I think one ought to respect that and not talk as if this is just a general discussion about how we can all get along. I said earlier that if you're a deist and you can say you think there is a God, you have all your work still ahead of you before you can be a theist and show there's a God who intervenes in human affairs. But once you've done that, there's a huge amount of trouble ahead. It's not my problem, but the Roman Catholics believe that ex ecclesia nulla salus, outside their church there's no salvation. You're not really a Christian unless you're their kind of Christian. I know many, many Protestants who say the same about Catholics, that Catholicism is a terrible heresy. A large part of my country of birth was convulsed in murder and destruction on this point, which kind of Christian you had to be in order to be a real one. These are not small distinctions, and people invoke them as strongly as they will invoke the idea that there's a God or a Christ or a Messiah in the first place. I don't believe the rabbi really thinks it doesn't matter if someone is Buddhist or Jewish. I don't believe he's got to that ecumenical stage. I don't believe he does. If he does, he's in a very small minority in his community. I think these things must be taken seriously. Now, you asked me, and it's a joke question, do I think I'm going to paradise? Of course not. I wouldn't go if I was asked. I don't want to live in some fucking celestial North Korea, for one thing, where all I get to do is praise the dear leader from dawn till dusk. I don't want this. It would be hell for me. So let's get that clear. But when Rick Warren, who's invited to give the invocation at the inauguration of an elected constitutional president of these United States, was asked in Colorado the other day by a Jewish woman, "Can I come to your paradise?" He says, "No." Well, screw him. And don't let's say that there's a nothing distinction. The trouble with religion only starts when people have affirmed that it's true. It only begins then. Then becomes the really nice bit, interreligious warfare. That's the really agreeable part.
I don't know what an encore is in this environment. Perhaps he could just sing one verse. One more verse.
Well, I could do it straight through.
Go ahead.
Of the boozed out philosophers.
Yes.
Of Wally Malou Philosophy Department. Ladies and Bruces. It's Eric Idle's great performance at the Hollywood Bowl. It's a real honor to be SK. Oh, Immanuel Kant was a real pissant who was very seldom stable. Martin Heidegger was a boozy beggar. He could think you under the table. David Hume could outconsume Schopenhauer and Hegel. And Wittgenstein was a beery swine. Wittgenstein was a beery swine who was just as sloshed as Schlegel. There's nothing Nietzsche couldn't teach you about the raising of the wrist. Socrates himself was permanently pissed. John Stuart Mill, of his own free will, on half a pint of shandy, got spectacularly ill. But Plato, they say, could stick it away. Half a crate of whiskey every day. Aristotle was a bugger for the bottle. Thomas Hobbes was a slave to his dram, and René Descartes was pissed as a fart. I drink, therefore I am. Yes, Socrates himself is particularly missed. A lovely little thinker. A lovely little thinker. Lovely little thinker, but a bugger when he's pissed.
Okay. Yeah.
If the song had a title, which it doesn't yet, I think it should be called Reductio.